These are the melee character's worst nightmare, summoned from the old days of Dungeons & Dragons when dungeon masters just simply wanted to make their players angry. Rust monsters destroy all metals that they touch, whether that is your sword or your shield or even your very expensive set of plate armor. Now, there are other creatures that do this, of course, like the Black Puddin', but unlike the Black Puddin', the Rust monster actually moves really fast, and also, unlike the Black Puddin', it only runs towards those that have really expensive armor. There are actually some really interesting lore about these creatures, but before we get into it, this video is brought to you by Factor. Get your meals conveniently delivered onto your home without the hassle of even preparing them. Factor delivers these pre-made meals onto your door, chef-curated, delicious meals that are way better than those TV meals that you find on the grocery stores. These ones are high quality, meant to be fast and great tasting, okay? Don't microwave these ones. I mean, you can, but that's not their purpose. You're not really meant to microwave them. These are meals to put onto the oven so that you can enjoy them at their peak. They are super quick though, literally just a few minutes on the oven, and they are perfect. Its convenience is a massive time saver. It doesn't just save you time on the cooking, but also on grocery shopping. I noticed that I am the most productive in the mornings and the early noons, and if I spend that productive time cooking, it just kind of ruins my workflow. Being able to just quickly make these meals literally helps me bring you more videos faster. It's been awesome. I used to do takeout, but it's gotten so expensive, and you never know what you're getting in terms of ingredients and macros. With Factor, you can specialize your deliveries so that you are getting exactly what you need. You can get extremely healthy food, you can get keto-specific meals, vegetarian, I mean anything you want. And it is a lot cheaper than takeout on top of all that, especially if you use my coupon code. These coupons are crazy. Use my link or go to go.factor75.com and use code POGREX60 for 60% off your first box. Literally 60%. And it's not like a single box with a single meal. We're talking about a box with many meals. So you're saving a ton of money. Hey, try it out. If you don't like it, that's fine, but don't pass out on these massive deals. 60% off to try this out is wild. Go to the website, check out the prices, and then do the math with 60% off. It's crazy. Use my link down in the description and give it a try. Now, back to the video. Alright, so let's first, as always, check out the 5th edition monster manual to see what they tell us. So the Rust monster is a very simple creature with, as you can see, a very simple entry. It doesn't really take us much to understand what this monster is all about. In here, they tell us that they, as the name implies, corrode ferrous metals. They eat the rust that they create. It says here that they have a sturdy carapace that gives them some protection and that they have an interesting tail with a weird bony protrusion, as you can see right here. Though they don't really mention much else about the tail. They also mention that they have these funny antennas in front of their insectoid face, but once again, don't really mention what the antenna is for. Down here they tell us that the rust monsters are generally pretty docile, not really being very aggressive. That is, unless you have metal, at which point they can smell that you're carrying it and then they rush you in order to get it. Interestingly enough, though, it says here that a rust monster doesn't care if the rust it consumes comes from a spike or a sword. Adventurers can actually distract the creature by dropping ferrous objects behind them. These two sentences are actually very misleading. The rust monster does have a preference in the metals that it consumes, but it is specifically whether the metal is ferrous or not. But yeah, we will cover that later. And then lastly down here, well, there really isn't much of interest here actually. They live in tunnels, underground, in dungeons, that sort of thing. The only interesting bits here are that 1, the rust monsters are basically never seen in packs. They typically always travel alone, and then 2, you can tame rust monsters if you feed them, since they are pretty docile, but that's it. Here in the stat sheet you can see that their carapace is okay. It definitely looks sturdier than what it actually is. It doesn't really compare to, for example, an Umber Hulk's carapace or a Cool's carapace, both being insectoid-like exoskeletons. This carapace grants the rust monster a +3 to AC, as we can see, which is alright. We can see that they are really fast, almost scarily fast. Basically, they are going to outpace any character who might wish to run away from them, basically forcing them to fight them, which is, again, really scary. As far as stats go, we can see that they're not very intelligent, which we will touch on later. They can see in the dark and then can pinpoint through scent any ferrous metal within 30 feet of them. And now, these two abilities, Rust Metal and Antenna, are the bread and butter of the Rust Monster. We here discover the use of the antenna in that if it touches any metal, it automatically corrodes it. But interestingly enough, if any metal also seemingly touches the body of the Rust Monster, it also gets corroded, which is very interesting. But yeah, the stat sheet gives you this impression that the antenna sort of corrodes things, but it also makes it seem like the entire body does that too. So again, we're left with the notion of what is the purpose of the antenna specifically. But anyways, that's basically about it. Like I said, a very simple entry for a very simple monster. Now, of course, we're not told how the monster actually corrodes things, and because this is D&D, one would probably be left to wonder that it is probably just like a magical ability of the creature, when in fact, it isn't. The way they do it is actually very, very interesting, but they don't really put that in here. But anyways, it's time. Let's talk about what they did not tell you about Rust Monsters. Okay, so like I said, the Rust Monster doesn't do the things that it does magically. Instead, it is through a specialized bacteria that exists within its body. See, the Rust Monster doesn't actually gain sustenance from the metal that it eats. Instead, it is this special bacteria within its body that needs it. These two form something of a symbiotic relationship, where they need each other to survive. The creature, this thing that you see before you, and nobody actually knows where it comes from or how it evolved the way it did. From its weird carapace to the odd shaped tail that it possesses to the extremely specialized antenna that it has. But this creature merely serves as a vessel, as a host that keeps this bacteria alive, and it is the bacteria that you should be fearful of. The way it works is the Rust Monster corrodes a piece of metal and then eats it. The bacteria in its stomach then live off of it by digesting it, and it is through the byproduct of this digestion that the Rust Monster gets its needs. Since when the bacteria eats, they create a sugar special compound, which is what the Rust Monster actually consumes. They also are said to feed off a little bit from the sun, getting some energy that way too. But now, why should you care, right? Like, why is this lore even necessary? Well, it is important because it answers some very important questions about the creature. See, the reason the antenna is important is because it is the only outside portion of the body that can host the bacteria. The bacteria can be found on the antenna, on the stomach, and on the bloodstream of the Rust Monster. So when you're fighting it, it is the antenna that you need to be really concerned about. If they don't have an antenna, then you're actually okay. And of course, if you remember, the stat sheet did mention that if you hit the monster with a weapon, that the weapon would corrode, which led us originally to believe that every part of the monster could rust metal, but that is in fact not true. What actually happens is if you strike the Rust Monster and your weapon is filled with the blood of the creature, then your weapon will corrode because, again, the bloodstream possesses the bacteria. If you smack the carapace with your weapon and don't create any blood, then you're actually fine, your weapon will be fine. But if you stab it with a blade and smear your weapon in their blood, then you're not fine. The game simulates this by assuming that if you hit and deal damage, that blood is probably going to be present, which means you're gonna get corroded. But the thing that you need to keep in mind would be the extent of the damage. I mean, if you grab a massive club and you smash that Rust Monster wide open, that blood is probably going to splash everywhere, and if it does, it's not going to be just your weapon that will get corroded, but your armor and everything else that blood lands into. And the way that the rusting mechanism works is extremely fast and all-consuming. If a single piece of metal gets that blood into it, the entire metallic object will corrode. The corrosion will follow the metal for as long as it has metal to consume, only stopping between metallic pieces if there is any separation between the metals. So if you're wearing something like, say, ring mail, you might actually get lucky because it will only affect, say, a single ring at a time, and then stop since it can't get to any more of the metal from there. But if the blood lands on a tiny piece of your enormous full plate armor, the entire thing will be devoured. See, another big reason why rust monsters are so much worse than stuff like the black puddings is because a black pudding is basically just acid. It's supposed to hit you multiple times before your armor gets corroded, but a rust monster technically only has to touch you once before your entire armor is destroyed. Now, in 5th edition, they made it pretty chill. The guy basically has to corrode you over 8 times to destroy your full plate armor, but in the lore, the way it is supposed to work is they just touch you once, and the armor would then be destroyed in a couple of rounds automatically without really a way to stop it once it starts. Now, another reason why understanding that it is a bacteria that does the corrosion being important is because it shows you why killing a rust monster doesn't really make it any less dangerous. A rust monster can die, but as long as the bacteria within it have metal to consume, the bacteria will keep on living basically forever. So a dead rust monster will still corrode your armor. The blood that it spilled everywhere, the blood that puddled all around you, that will still corrode your boots. But also the cool thing is that you could theoretically, say, grab a vial of this blood and use it to corrode other things. And you can literally weaponize this bacteria. In fact, Ed Greenwood himself wrote about this in a Dragon magazine entry almost 30 years ago. Quote, "The bacteria can survive and continue to act through the antenna for 6 to 105 days after the death of the host rust monster, depending on the availability of food. The bacteria can thrive on previously devoured metallic oxides in the stomach and bloodstream of the monster, any metallic weapons left lodged in the monster's body, or newly introduced metal. But the bacteria will die when such supplies are exhausted. A rust monster's antenna that was placed in a bowl of water with rust and a lot of metal could continue to thrive indefinitely, and perhaps could even be carried as a weapon for occasions of 5 days or less before the bacteria would need to have their food supply replenished. A scavenger that devours a rust monster would have any previously devoured metallic treasure still in its body, rusted and eaten by the bacteria, but the bacteria could not take over the creature so that its attacks would have the ability to rust. Only the creature known as the rust monster can support the mysterious bacteria, and rust monsters do not eat each other. In the example of the scavenger mentioned above, the bacteria would die when its metallic food in the scavenger's stomach was used up, without harming the host, and would be excreted." End quote. So this is fascinating actually, because the way Ed Greenwood wrote it, if you, a human, were to eat, say, a raw rust monster for dinner, you would get this special bacteria then on your stomach, and if you do, then you would theoretically be able to, literally be able to digest metal, because the bacteria would digest it for you. It's unclear what benefits this would bring to the host, like whether this special sugar compound that the bacteria secretes from this consumption would give you like actual energy, but it's just cool that this can actually happen in this way. But yeah. So that's how the rusting of metal actually works, and the rust monster requires about 1 good meal every 2 months for it to survive, and a good meal for it basically entails the equivalent of a suit of full plate. As long as it gets that like once around every 2 months, provided that it doesn't expend too much energy, then the creature will be healthy. Now, rust monsters are supposed to be able to smell metal for up to 90 feet away, which is substantially more than what the 5th edition entry told you. Now, this particular range is only for the types of metal which we call ferrous metals, which are basically just metals that contain iron. So this would basically be, well, iron and steel. However, rust monsters can also smell non-ferrous metals, which the 5th edition entry did not tell you, though only at about a third of the distance. Non-ferrous metals are basically stuff like copper, silver, and gold, and it can also corrode and eat those as well. Now, what's interesting is that when the rust monster smells one of these, something triggers in its brain. It like shuts off. It could be the bacteria just basically taking over the body, or some kind of other evolutionary pattern of the creature, but it completely changes the mind of the creature. See, rust monsters are actually very, very docile. They don't really go out of their way to mess with people at all. They don't really bite unless heavily disturbed. They're just like overall really chill creatures. But the second that they smell metal, especially ferrous metal, they lose their marbles. Whatever change happens in their brain is actually so strong that rust monsters are supposed to become immune to magical attempts to dissuade them from eating the metal. It is described as their mind becoming so single-minded in their pursuit of the metal that it just doesn't notice any attempts at coercion. And this includes physical coercion too, not just magical. They don't care if you're stabbing it. They don't care if you're burning it or spilling acid over the rust monster. It will just simply keep going for the metal until there is no more metal left. The lore actually states that not even a dominate monster spell works, which is insane. Now, what you're supposed to do to get a rust monster off of your scent is to throw it a ferrous metal for it to eat as a distraction while you run away. Because again, this like mental single-mindedness thing that it does have has its drawbacks, in that it will always go for the closest ferrous metal that it can smell. So if you throw something at it that is metal, it'll go for that something, even if it's just like a small python or something, and then you will be able to run away. Now, the way the lore describes it is that this particular sense of smell is tied to magnetism. Basically, the more pure the metal is, the more heightened this smell becomes. Now, I myself don't understand magnetism or how it works, but the lore says very clearly that traces of metal immersed or suspended in liquid, sand, or clay do not attract the smell of the rust monster. So based on that, you should then be able to jump onto a pond of water to avoid a rust monster sensing you, which is really interesting. And yeah, escaping one of these things can be hard because, like I said before, they can last for over 2 months with a single good metallic meal in their body. So they can wait you out if they have to. There are stories of people climbing onto trees to avoid a rust monster, only to have the rust monster just sit there under the tree for days, waiting for the person to either pass out or give up. Remember, they only need to eat once every 2 months or so, so they will wait for as long as they have to, and they will because, again, their brain basically shuts off completely when they can smell metal. Now, the only thing we don't really know about these creatures, and this is something that I alluded to before, is really where they come from and how a creature can evolve into this naturally, forming a symbiotic relationship with a bacteria in this fashion. See, the tale is in fact a mystery that is probably tied to this evolutionary imperative, since it has been described in the lore as being kind of odd and, oddly enough, sort of unused, like a vestigial organ, something that had a purpose at some point in the evolutionary pattern of the creature, but then lost its purpose along the way, and now it just sits there like a memory of what the creature used to be. Some adventurers have claimed to have seen the rust monster use it as a way to trip people, just so that they can get a better hold of their metal, but it might also not be doing that on purpose, being obviously as single-minded as it is during those encounters. The creature also possesses a 6-inch long tongue, described as dexterous and sticky, which is what the creature actually uses to eat the rust that falls off the metals that it corrodes. And lastly, to finish off the video, let's talk about reproduction. So, rust monsters, as the 5th edition entry very aptly described, never really travel in groups. They are extremely solitary creatures, and even reproduction takes on a backseat to the more important business of eating metal. Quote, rust monsters mate often, following a ritual in which each of the pair makes agitated, chittering noises for several minutes. If one of the adults is fertilized, a young rust monster will begin to form in the body of the parent. It'll be born 4 to 7 months later, live, whole, and active, and will usually accompany its parent until it is fully grown. End quote. These baby rust monsters are described as being as powerful as their adult counterparts, at least in terms of their ability to corrode things. Again, it's the bacteria, not the monster, that you should be concerned about, and the bacteria of the babies are as strong as the bacteria from the adults. It will only take about 8 months or so for this baby to become a full-grown adult, at which point it'll leave its parent and go on its own. And then in about an extra 4 or so months, it'll then be mature enough to reproduce if it so wished. Hey fellas, I just released What They Don't Tell You About Magic Items, a new PDF with absolutely everything that you need to run magic items in your games. It's basically a collection of magic items and their prices, with rules as to how to purchase them. Do you want to buy a +1 weapon? Well, how much does it cost? Do you want to enchant your armor with a +1? How much does that cost? What if I want to do something a bit more complicated, God forbid, like create a staff with magical spells on it? These are basic questions that normally have no answers. DMs have to make up those answers based on rough estimates that are given to us in the Dungeon Master's Guide. We have the estimates, but at the end of the day, the DM has to literally make those prices up. Well, I have those answers for you. I can tell you what the price is for a 3rd level spell scroll or a potion of haste. We have prices for bags of holding or sending stones. The idea is that with players having access to this PDF, they should now be able to know exactly what they can purchase and for how much. Just how players have access to a table like this for weapons and armor, or a table like this for adventuring supplies, you will now have a table with different kinds of magic weapons, their descriptions, and their price tags so that you can just buy them whenever you have the money. Look, a lot of the stuff that I do is fairly niche. Like, I have been creating monster classes, very specialized armor systems, and these are things that cater to a very specific type of player or DM, but this? Everyone should have this. No one should be out there wondering how much does a scroll cost or a potion of greater healing. D&D is about adventuring and doing quests in order to collect gold, but players often find themselves not really knowing what to spend gold on because they don't have access to tables like these. Now that you know how much exactly a +1 shield costs, you will want to collect that gold and save up for it. If you are a dungeon master, you no longer have to worry about making up magic item shops or trying to figure out the price for things. I have done all that work for you, but all in all, this is a PDF for players. I have been absolutely loving how my players have suddenly started caring so much about gold, because now they can spend it on really cool stuff too. Give it a look. Look, I absolutely love my Monster Classes series, but this is by far the most useful thing that I have ever created. I literally cannot imagine playing D&D without this now. What They Don't Tell You About Magic Items. It's on my shop, mrrex.shop. You can find it in the link in the description or click any of the products under the video to get taken over to the shop. Thank you guys very much. I would like to thank my Patreon supporters, Barry Maskant, 5e Magic Shop, Morgan Johnson, Rusty Rain, Dog Feeder, The Great Codini, Omega Scales, Terry Culp, Falky951, Ordoric, Samim Kurshap, Thomas Hunt, Soulless Rider, Stalia, Treb909, Trevor Hess, The Living Guild Pack, Shane and Sam Skinner, Steven, Naxtor Ashura, The Wizard's Vault, Herbert Johnson, James the Perverted, Shoddycast, Jesse Feliciano, Lucas Cyrek, John Harley, Sir Ignatius Thunderblade, Warren Smith, Wyvern Claw 00, Chrissy 3, Merton Games, Loa, Falcon Scientist, Richard Sawyer, Movrath Master of Secrets, Lauren, Guy Broman, Mediocre at Best, and Similar Sound for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRex to support. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for being here, check out the store, and I'll see you all next time.